Hi everyone, this is the second tutorial for the Romeo and Juliet essay. The first one went through the preparation log, and this one will be tackling your prompt construction and the essay requirements, the required essay components, and the prompt construction. You have your topic, but you want a prompt. And composing a powerful prompt that elicits dynamic responses is, I think, a very significant skill to have. So, what I like to use a lot of the time when I'm constructing prompts is something called the depth of knowledge sort of approach. And there are different levels in the depth of knowledge. There are 4 levels. And each level gets progressively more complex. And so whereas levels 1 and 2 kind of just ask for recall and basic application, levels 3 and 4 require much more strategic and extended thinking. And this is where I'm able to, as a teacher, hear more interesting, dynamic, complex, critical thinking on the page, rather than just there's one right answer. It's just recall. It's just regurgitating basic elements of the plot or whatever I'm asking. So I think it's a great skill for you to understand what goes into creating a prompt, so that you can understand the pieces involved, and then you can better answer them and make sure that your response is hitting all of those pieces. Because most of the time, prompts have not just one layer to them. So I'm providing you with this chart. It's just the depth of knowledge chart, and it just gives you a lot of verbs that are associated with tasks and that will kind of give you the action portion of your prompt. You already know the topic. So if you take a topic and you add an action, you now have a prompt. You have something for someone to do. The verb you choose will really help elicit the quality of your analysis. So if you ask, what are examples of foreshadowing in the play? A what question really only allows for a level 1 response, because you're just going to say, here's one example of foreshadowing, here's another example of foreshadowing, and there's no element of diving deeper and giving it this piece of significance, like, well, what does the foreshadowing do? Why is it relevant? Why does Shakespeare include it? What impact does it have? Just by giving examples of foreshadowing, that doesn't really do a lot. So you instead might ask your writer to analyze how Shakespeare uses foreshadowing to strengthen character development. So now I'm not only identifying the foreshadowing, I'm also going so far as to connect it to what it reveals about characters and how they might change or grow or develop. And I'm also going to be discussing how Shakespeare does that. And so when does he bring in these elements? How does he bring them in? A lot of the time he likes to use metaphoric language with this foreshadowing, and what layers of complexity does that add? So you might even go so far as to specifically pinpoint, instead of just character development. Development can be somewhat vague. You could say to develop character flaws. And now I know every instance of foreshadowing you give me is going to be pointing to something that's inherently negative about a character or has a flaw-like quality. So that foreshadowing piece is just an example. But I just am trying to help explain the idea that you want to go beyond just straight recall and regurgitation. You want to have a real interesting prompt that allows for depth in your response. So here's the chart, and you can see the different levels. And a lot of your who, what, where, when, why stuff is just recall. And then if you're kind of like discussing cause and effect or classifying things or predicting, that does bring you to the next level. But my favorites are the levels 3 and 4. I tend to sit most in a combination of 3 and 4. So I really like to ask students to analyze or critique or prove, but then I will inherently ask in that to cite evidence, to draw conclusions. Drawing conclusions to me is every time you're making those thematic connections, that's drawing a conclusion. Like all of this is pointing in the direction of giving this message. Critiquing the value of how things are presented. The evidence, of course, is going to be huge for us. You have to give that quoted material and develop your use of embedded quotes in order to add strength to what you're giving. And then even comparison, I like to do a lot. It's really interesting. You know, in Midsummer, you guys presented human relationships, and there was that just inherent comparison happening where you could talk about one relationship, and then when you moved on in the next body paragraph to your next relationship, there was a sense of comparison of either this is a similar situation or this is different and this is how it's different, or whatnot. And then a logical argument is always at play, right? You need to have a logical sense of how you're presenting things. So these two, the level 3 and level 4, I think are very great lanes to go down. And in particular, asking to analyze, asking to connect, asking to prove or critique are very powerful verbs. So also, if you want to have it in the form of a question, instead of saying what or when, even going into the realm of how is a much more powerful question word to use. How does Shakespeare create XYZ? So if you want to go a question route, I would really encourage how. And why, I think, is not always level 1. If you can take a why and then pair it up with something in level 3 or 4, I think that's fine. But how, I think, is really helpful as well. So anyway, I'm asking for your prompt to be on your first draft. So you can just do your MLA heading and then give me the prompt, just literally write prompt, colon, and then give the prompt, and then title your essay and give the essay. If you want to run your prompt by me before the Friday that the first draft is due, I'm super excited and willing to do that. In fact, I'm going to be holding some Zoom office hours the final, I think it's 3 weeks of school, starting Memorial Day week. I will have 1 day a week where I have open office hours for Zoom if you want to, quote unquote, face-to-face discuss your prompt or your essay for that matter. And also you can send me a quick Google chat or email or chat on the agenda doc. Hey, Mrs. Benson, what do you think of this prompt? And I'm super excited if you do that, because then I can make sure you're starting in the right place. So feel free to send your prompts my way once you have them crafted, or, at least bare minimum, have it on your first draft so that when I read over your first draft, I can read that prompt and make sure you're starting at a good place. And so that's the prompt construction. I'm going to just wrap this up with the required essay components. This is our last essay of the year, and it's sort of in lieu of or the component of the final essay as well, since we don't have at school finals. So it will be worth 150 points. So keep that in mind. The higher point value means that it's going to be a meatier essay. So typically our essays are 100 points. This is 150. So typically if you give me 2.5 pages, I would aim for 3.5 pages. Not that length is everything, but just development wise, there are more quotations required for this essay. It's counting as your final. You want to really pour your best writing into this. And therefore, ask me questions, share it with Miss Van Mill, make sure that you're getting the best feedback you can to make sure it's your best writing. So it's 150 points, but it will be in the writing category. The English department at Laguna Beach High School, assessed our situation with distance learning. All of us have 20% final exams as a category in our grade book, and we are all keeping that category blank so that your grade is weighted simply by the categories that we've had this entire time. And therefore, this essay is still going to go into the writing category. But as I mentioned before, it's worth 150 points rather than just 100. So that means it counts more. So anyway, the due dates: first draft, June 5th, final draft. This is the first time ever that we are going to have a Thursday due date. I wanted to keep with the true last day of school. So that's why I had to do Thursday, since we don't have school on Friday, whatever, having school looks like these days. It's in your folder for June 5th, but in turnitin.com for June 11th. And just make sure this is your own work. I highly recommend you reach out to me, you visit during the Zoom office hours, or you share your essay with Miss Van Mill. I will even give you extra credit if you share your first draft with her. Please don't feel like you should do some Google searching or asking of friends and just doing what a friend does. In particular, the quotes are always highlighted on Turnitin. And so I can see if you have the same exact quotes as someone else. If you have all 8 quotes the same as some other student, that's not great. So just really work by yourself on this, but don't feel like you just have to remain lost. You can ask me questions. I can give you help. Miss Van Mill can give you help. I certainly want to be a resource for you and not make you feel like you're lost and can't figure this out. These are the requirements. I'm trying to stay in the same vein as what we've been doing this whole semester as far as analysis essays, but at the same time amp it up just a bit since it's the final essay of the year and counting as the final. So I recommend about 4 to 6 paragraphs, but if you need to go 7 or 8, that's fine. I want you to feel a good sense of flexibility, that if you have just one quote from one incident that's really powerful and you want to isolate it in a paragraph, but it's a shorter paragraph, that's fine. And then you go on to another incident, another piece of evidence in a different paragraph. This essay it's our last essay, so it's our biggest quotation requirement, 8. And my hope is that you gathered 10 quotes for your prep log, and my hope is that those 8 can come right from that log. So I'm hoping that works out for you. And then I want to see a dynamic prompt, so I'll be able to read that on your first draft and check for that. Good development throughout. Remember, analysis always wins the day over summary. So I know the play. I've read the play dozens and dozens of times, if not close to 100. So you want to provide me with analysis, not just summary. I know the plot. You can use a bit of context summary to embed your quotation, but then you really get down to analysis. How and why is your evidence significant or relevant to your point? Okay, so think about your point is your thesis, which I think I skipped that, sorry. Your thesis should kind of give me, this is the direction I'm going. I'm going to talk about how violence does this. I'm going to talk about how foreshadowing has done this. I'm going to talk about how symbolism conveys this message, and I say this message, but I mean, you're telling me in your thesis what that message is. You're telling me what violence does in that thesis. So that's the key to unlock the point of your essay. Make sure you stick in present tense. I know it's funky. People die in the play. And it's funky to use present tense, but you can always kind of just play with your language and your delivery, because it's important. Anytime you're analyzing literature, you're in present tense always. You don't want Romeo and Juliet essay as your title, so make sure you have an original title that kind of hints at your thesis, it hints at the topic. And the writing style should be, your best work. So think about strong active verbs, not doing a lot of is's and are's, varied sentence starters. It's really easy in an essay like this to start often with Romeo or Juliet or any character name. But I encourage you to think about verbals, subordinate clauses, phrases, intentional moves in your writing that point to the skills that you've acquired over the course of this year. I'm just so proud of you guys. You have really think about how much work you've completed, how much writing you've done, how much reading you've read, you've accomplished. I'm very proud of you. I think you should all be proud of yourselves. It was a choice to take Honors English 9, and you made that choice. And I'm just very proud and grateful that you stuck with this class and sort of had the perseverance to complete these assignments that aren't easy, and so I think you should have a lot of pride in yourself for doing so. But anyway, I'm excited to see what you guys come up with for your prompts, and I'm excited that I get to read about different topics from all of you. So I hope you've picked something that is of interest and can at least make the assignment more doable. Please reach out to me in those 3 weeks. I think it's 2 Wednesdays and a Tuesday that I set up for. So each week in our last 3 weeks of school, you can chat with me on Zoom. You can mention any questions on the Flipgrid assessment, Flipgrid assignment that we have coming up, or at least this week I don't know when you're listening to this. This is a funky place for me to be in the past, but you're reading this in the future. But with that said, good luck, you guys, and shoot me any kind of message or email if you have questions.